evening. Welcome to the Big Story. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Pauline Verzosa.
Tonight's Big Stories, the legal battles of former President Rodrigo Duterte pile up. Now, a group wants him disbarred for alleged conduct unbecoming of a lawyer.
8 in 10 Filipinos support the government's efforts to assert the Philippines' maritime rights in the South China Sea.
And in Los Angeles, California, firefighting efforts are yet to turn a corner, resulting in more victims by the day that include Filipinos.
President Bongbong Marcos remains firm on his position over calls to impeach Vice President Sara Duterte. It's not the time to do it, he says.
Marcos was reacting to statements made by Chief Legal Counsel Juan Ponce Enrile, questioning the rallies launched by Iglesia ni Cristo last Monday.
For Enrile, the rallies could, quote, set a very detrimental precedent on due process and the rule of law. Marian Enriquez with that story.
Despite the political implications, Iglesia ni Cristo maintains its recent massive rally was meant to support President Bongbong Marcos' stance against impeaching Vice President Sara Duterte. The INC's so-called peace rally at the Carino Grandstand on January 13 supposedly drew 1.5 million people. In a social media post 2 days after the gathering, Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Juan Ponce Enrile questioned the logic behind INC's narrative. Enrile warned of a very detrimental precedent if the country were to follow the INC's reasoning. Enrile also went on to say, quote, are we prepared to discard or sacrifice the value of rule of law for a person or a group of persons? He said that impeachment is an exercise of due process to exact accountability and that it is not meant to send the impeached official to jail. Enrile is coming from somewhere. As Senate President in 2012, he presided over the impeachment trial of then Supreme Court Chief Justice Renato Corona. That year, the INC also held rallies in what was supposed to be a subtle call to Malacanang not to convict Corona. But Enrile and 19 other senators voted for Corona's impeachment. Former Senators Miriam Santiago, Joker Arroyo, and then Senator Marcos Jr. voted against. In an interview today, Marcos was asked about Enrile's comments. Marcos said that while he respects Enrile's statement,
he is right. There is a consequence to. There will be a precedence, and it will be very problematic.
It is still not the right time to undertake an impeachment process.
I don't think that now is the time to go through that. So, paubayan na muna natin sa ating... Total, as a practical matter, papasok na tayo sa campaign period. And so, as a practical matter, the timing is very poor.
The President's position in the Vice President's impeachment has left those who endorsed the 3 complaints against her dismayed and baffled.
Ibig mo sabihin, pati siya ay hindi siya naniniwala na dapat na panagutin sa kanyang kasalanan sa bayan, si Vice President Duterte.
For News 5, I'm Marian Enriquez. We are One News.
Former President Rodrigo Duterte is facing a number of cases over his war on drugs, and now add disbarment to that laundry list. The families of alleged victims of extrajudicial crimes, human rights group Karapatan and other human rights advocates today filed a disbarment case against him. Their trigger, Digong's plan to lawyer for his daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, if the impeachment complaint against her reaches Senate. The complainants cited Mr. Duterte's supposed violation of the lawyer's code of conduct and the code of professional responsibility. Now, disbarment can be filed either before the High Court or the Integrated Bar of the Philippines on grounds of violating the lawyer's oath, malpractice, and deceit. On its own, the SC can disbar a lawyer even without a recommendation from the IBP, as in the case of former lawyer Larry Gadon, who was expelled from the legal profession over sexist remarks.
Dinuduraan ni Duterte ang propesyon ng abogasya. Si Duterte ay kriminal, bastos, mamamatay tao at hindi siya karapat-dapat na abogado.
Duterte is now, of course, running for mayor in Davao City. He was admitted to the bar back in 1973 and served as prosecutor before holding government posts. Digong is now being investigated by the International Criminal Court for allegedly causing the death of thousands under his drug war, something that his former chief legal counsel repeatedly denied.
Wala siyang pinapatay. In other words, if you're making him accountable for a crime, he has not committed any crime. And assuming that he has committed a crime, you have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt para maging accountable ka. That is the only time you can file a disbarment charge against a member of the bar.
We take a look at yet another survey, and this one is on the West Philippine Sea. Majority of the Filipinos support the government's efforts to defend and assert the country's maritime rights in the West Philippine Sea. Now, that's according to the latest Tugon ng Masa survey conducted by the OCTA Research Group. An impressive 84% of adult Filipinos rally behind the government's efforts to protect our maritime rights, with the highest in agreement coming from NCR with 90%. The survey also reveals that an overwhelming majority, or 91% to be precise, of adult Filipinos are aware of the ongoing territorial disputes in the West Philippine Sea. Awareness is highest in the Visayas region with 96%. The survey was conducted through face-to-face interviews from November 10 to 16, 20 to 24, with 1,200 respondents aged 18 and above. Chinese maritime incursions in Philippine waters have intensified in the recent months. This month, the Chinese Coast Guard's so-called monster ship has been lurking off the coastline of Zambales for at least 11 days now. Both sides have issued radio challenges to each other, with National Security Council's Jonathan Malaya quoted as saying China was pushing the Philippines to the wall with this particular incident.
I looked at the calendar again, and actually that's 13 days now that the monster ship has been parked off the coastline of Zambales. Lots to talk about, certainly. Let's break it down a little bit further. Joining us this Friday night is our resident geopolitical and foreign affairs analyst, Richard Darian. Richard, where are you?
Kamusta na? Back in Manila. Good to have you back and good to be among you fantastic people.
Good to see your beautiful face again. I thought you were going to be here in the studio with us.
I was not aware. Sorry, I had.
Okay.
Ko lang, kaya pawis pa ako. Sorry. Mahabol lang.
Okay, so the survey, OCTA survey on majority Filipinos, 8 in 10 Filipinos supporting the government's efforts to assert rights in the maritime domain is not surprising by any measure, but the fact that the China Coast Guard 5901, the so-called monster ship, is still there. This is something we were talking about off cam. Has been parked off the coast of Zambales for about 13 days now and counting, despite calls by Manila to, to move on. And despite the fact that they just, both sides, Manila and Beijing, just had the 10th bilateral consultation mechanism this week. What do we make of all of this belligerence?
Sorry, Regina. My audio went suddenly into my AirPod. Could you just repeat that question? Sorry
It
about
was a
that.
long question, but anyway.
AirPod. Sorry.
I don't even remember my own question. It was
It's
so
a Friday.
Long. But anyways,
It's a Friday.
The point is, monster ship still in Zambales, 13 days now. We just had bilateral consultation mechanism meetings with China.
Yeah.
Still, it's there are no signs that they might leave. What do we make of that?
Well, the fact of the matter is that we're in a very sensitive transition period. We're just days away from a new administration taking over in the United States. We already had a couple of very entertaining, Senate confirmation hearings in the United States. It turns out that the incoming U.S. Defense Secretary is not very aware of ASEAN, but I'm sure he's aware of where the Philippines is in this part of the world. But from the statements we're hearing from top officials, whether it's Pete Hegseth for the Defense Secretary or it's Senator Marco Rubio for the Secretary of State, it looks like we're going to have a bunch of very China-focused folks taking over the top two positions when it comes to foreign defense policy of the second Trump administration. Let's just be honest. No one knows. Probably even Trump doesn't know what is he going to do. But the people are going to run his day-to-day foreign defense policy. Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, some of the folks we had even on our show, like Elbridge Colby, who will be the number 2 in terms of running policy in the Pentagon. All of these people are saying the U.S. has to focus on China. China is number 1 threat. And Marco Rubio also the other day was very clear, Senator Rubio was very clear that China should stop bullying part of U.S. allies and partners, whether it's Taiwan or U.S. treaty allies like the Philippines, and he has promised to double down on his on America's assistance to key allies, frontline allies like the Philippines. So when we're looking at the transition towards a new administration in the United States, I think everyone is trying to put forward their strongest, essentially, version. In the case of China, by putting their monster ship there, something that they do quite regularly every year. They're trying to remind everyone of who has the preponderance of force, who's the superpower in this part of the world, and essentially also intimidate our fellow ASEAN countries into some sort of diffidence. I was just in Kuala Lumpur for an ASEAN conference earlier this month, and to be honest, barely anyone discussed the South China Sea disputes, barely anyone discussed ways to support the Philippines. The cliche that I kept on hearing, not only from Malaysian counterparts, but also from Thai and other regional counterparts, is we have to be neutral, we shouldn't choose between any of the superpowers. So when you have that situation, China wants to remind everyone who's the boss militarily in the South China Sea so that ASEAN also doesn't do anything significant. But on the part of the Philippines, we're also signaling that we're not backing out, that no matter who's the American president, we're going to continue what we have started under the Marcos administration, or some would say much earlier under the Ramos and the Pinoy administration, which is to hold the line and to make sure that we're not just going to allow China to have its way. And we're also signaling to the Trump administration that this is not about us just relying on Biden. We are more than happy to work with any of our key allies to make sure that China will not get its way. So it's signaling both on the part of China and also part of the Philippines ahead of the Trump administration taking shape in the coming days.
Won't the aggressive stance of the upcoming administration also won't it drag us also into that conflict of two superpowers? We were talking about it. On one hand, we will get more support. It seems like it's going that way. But on the other hand, it might trigger more flashpoints in this arena. The West Philippine Sea might be a battleground for that. What do you make of, the level of aggressiveness of China? Are they preparing for the upcoming administration?
Well, if you look at the top Chinese strategists, including a couple of them, Xuetong, for instance, Professor Xuetong from Shanghai, they have been saying that we're ready for another Trump. We already saw the first version of Trump. The second version will probably be a variation on the theme. So go on, be our guest. And of course, China has every reason to be confident because, yes, despite the fact that they have demographic dividend, their economic growth is down to only 5% if we were to believe even their official numbers. The fact of the matter is that China's economy today is significantly larger than China's economy during the first Trump administration. And more importantly, China's military prowess and its technological prowess is significantly more advanced than when Trump was in charge of the United States. As you remember, over the past 3 or 4 years, China has conducted one of the most sophisticated and complex, massive multi-domain exercises around Taiwan. This was during the Biden administration in response to Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan a few years ago. So this is a different version of China that Trump is going to deal with. So China is saying Trump is going to be Trump, but the China you're going to face is much more powerful. And to be fair, again, based on my own experience of dealing with fellow ASEAN countries, my own observation in Kuala Lumpur earlier this month, it looks like more and more countries in the region are also kind of seeing China as the inevitable hegemon or superpower in this part of the world. And they are also very doubtful about America's staying power, America's internal coherence, and also doubtful about whether Trump has what it takes to make America maintain its position as a predominant force in this part of the world. So clearly China is doing all of this not from a position of dread, but from a position of confidence. And that's why it's important for the Philippines to also signal confidence and signal its investment in continuity of bilateral alliance cooperation as we deal with this marathon, which is the West Philippine Sea disputes.
Rich, where Gretchen was coming from is that we were talking about this in previous days as well, because we carried the Marco Rubio sound bites from his confirmation hearing, and there's no other way to put it. His words were quite inflammatory, right? He said, for instance, and I quote, China lied and cheated its way to becoming a superpower. He said China was the most potent and dangerous adversary that the United States has ever faced. He is all for ramping up support for Taiwan, contrary to what Trump has suggested on the campaign trail. So I guess the question there would be, I wonder if you have any thoughts on whether or not that kind of rhetoric is going to worsen relations between the U.S. and China, and then in the process drag us along with it.
Well, I mean, to be fair to Senator Marco Rubio, he also made certain statements about, he wants to make sure that there are guardrails there, including in terms of intra-Korean relations. He doesn't want war in Korea, among others. But the fact of the matter is that since 2015, since the end, essentially, of the Obama administration, whether you look at Trump 1.0, whether you look at the Biden administration and now the incoming Trump administration, there is a bipartisan consensus in the United States. This is not just a Republican MAGA thing. This is also a Democratic, more or less, position that China is the number one threat to America's global hegemony, primacy, leadership, whatever you want to call it. This is a position shared across the political spectrum, perhaps with the exception of the Bernie Sanders or the more progressive wing of the Democratic administration. So, in a sense, what Marco Rubio is saying is just a much more, I would say, spicy version of what we were already hearing under Democrats. So, for instance, under the Biden administration, if you listen to Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, whether it's Blinken, the Secretary of State, and most importantly, the Pentagon Chief outgoing Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, all of them also made it clear that China is the number one challenge to the United States global primacy and also to rules-based order in this part of the world. So I won't make too much out of it. And my sense is the Chinese are also not making too much out of it. They just see continuity of what already began almost a decade ago. So from 2015 onwards, we see increasing bipartisan consensus on the need for U.S. to confront China. And there's this sense also, of course, among MAGA folks, among Republican folks, that China cheated the liberal international order, that they use globalization, trade, investment, access to Western technology, not only to beat American and Western companies in all sorts of different sectors, EV, artificial intelligence, 5G telecommunication, but also in the military realm. If you look at hypersonic missile systems, some of the new fighter jets that China is developing, the reading in the United States, especially among Republicans, is that a lot of that was because of technological theft. And a lot of that was because of technological transfer from the West to China, and that China weaponized essentially globalization for its own benefit. My read on that is, yeah, I mean, this is what has been happening throughout history, right? The Germans did it to the French and the British, the Japanese did it to the West, and then later on, the story of modernization and rise and fall of superpowers is new rising powers copying, stealing from the previous declining powers. So I think what Marco Rubio is mentioning is not something unique to our historical moment. What is unique is that China is just the largest ever country that is non-Western that has come this far technologically and militarily in the last half a millennium. That is what I think is quite shocking and hard to absorb for a lot of Americans, especially Republicans and MAGA folks.
But Richard, did that surprise you? I mean, these strong words from Marco Rubio, because we were talking about this last night. Trump has been known to be very transactional, right? He did even say that if Taiwan wants the support of the U.S., then they would have to pay. But here you have Secretary of State nominee Marco Rubio pushing for a stronger stance against China and essentially putting Taiwan's security on the world stage.
Well, as I said, I think as far as Trump's mind is concerned, I don't even think he knows himself what he's going to do in the coming years. So there's no point in trying to make sense out of what is like the algorithm of Trump. But to the degree that we can say what is the algorithm of Trump, it's that he wants to open space for unorthodox solutions. Now, clearly, on one hand, if there's one thing consistent with Trump is that he wants allies to pitch in more. So Taiwan is already spending close to 3 or 4% of its gross domestic product on defense spending. Well, Trump is saying spend twice that. And when you spend twice that, buy American weapon systems so that we can make a lot of money out of that, right? So that's one thing consistent with Trump. He wants allies, whether in Europe or Asia, to pitch in more, especially wealthy allies and partners, whether it's first world countries, major military powers like Japan, NATO members in EU, or even partners like Taiwan, which is a very developed country and can have even more investment in its own military capabilities. But I think, of course, Donald Trump also has people like Elon Musk, who's very much invested in China, who has behind the scenes been talking to the Russians, Iranians, and the Chinese and doing his own parallel personal diplomacy. So there are also some tendencies within the MAGA movement and also within the Trump administration which want some art of the deal, grand bargain with China. But the fact of the matter is that, as I said, if the everyday defense and foreign policy of the United States is going to be run by Marco Rubio types, Elbridge Colby types, I don't think we're going to see a nice, let's be nice to China kind of America. At best, perhaps what we're going to see is the United States, which will put a lot of pressure on China, probably the same with Russia, probably the same with Iran, this revisionist powers or rival powers, and then push for some sort of a deal or a grand bargain. But in the meantime, the Philippines should not just be, standing idly by. We should also show to the Americans and to the Chinese that our faith as a country, as an independent country, will not be hostage to the whims or the whimsical tendencies of any superpower. And that when it comes to our alliance with the United States, we expect them to honor their side of the bargain, as they should expect us to hold the line. And if there's anything that I've noticed in my trips all around the world over the past 2 years or so, including meeting with heads of states, among others, is that they appreciate what the Philippines is doing. Maybe not in ASEAN, but in Europe, in the United States, among others, they appreciate what we're doing in the South China Sea. So we have to just continue what we do so that the Americans also realize that we are a reliable partner and we're an important semi-frontline state. The best way I can put it is that the Philippines is like Poland of Asia. I'm not talking about Poland in the 18th, 19th, or 20th century. I'm talking about Poland of today. Poland of today is a major U.S. ally and at the very front of helping Ukraine against Russia and keeping Russia as much as possible at bay. So the Philippines can play a similar role to Poland. Our economy is almost as big as Poland. Our population is bigger than Poland. We're not a superpower, but we can be a really reliable partner for the United States. So this is the message that we have to send, and these are the conversations that we have to have behind the scenes with the incoming Trump administration.
I want to get your thoughts on the upcoming ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas in that side of the world. It is said to happen on Sunday, January 19. The Israel's cabinet has yet to sign off on this deal. There are still Palestinians who are getting killed at this very moment before that. But what is your read? Both the Biden administration and President Trump are taking credit for this because they both have teams there. But do you think are they giving this win to Trump or to Biden? I mean, one day before he leaves office and one day before Trump gets inaugurated. I mean, do you think President Trump will inspire more respect given his unpredictability in world affairs?
Well, the Gaza issue is very important, right? Because again, if you go to Malaysia nowadays, you go across ASEAN, a lot of people talk about Gaza issue. And my sense is America's policy on the Gaza issue is something that that pro-China elements across the region are going to use against the United States, and that people are critical of the West. I mean, you had no less than Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, really openly accusing the West of hypocrisy when it comes to international law, upholding international law, when it comes to International Criminal Court, for instance, its warrant of arrest against Israeli leaders. Now, the fact of the matter is, technically, this ceasefire deal, if it holds, because there are many phases to it. There's exchange of prisoners. I think in Israel, there's a law that if you're about to release certain prisoners, there's a 48-hour appeal period. So let's see if there will be agents saboteurs, what's going to happen. But assuming everything runs smoothly from Sunday onwards, yes, by next week, we can look at a situation whereby Trump will be inaugurated. And finally, we have a semblance of the beginning of a new chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I think practically the consensus among all major pundits following what's happening in the Middle East nowadays and American foreign policy is that what was agreed to recently is not too different from what Biden had put on table 6, 7, 8 months ago. What has changed is that Trump is coming in. And we know that a few days ago, Trump sent a special envoy to meet the Israeli leadership, and that the special envoy of Donald Trump made it absolutely clear that Trump doesn't want this thing to continue. He wants some sort of stability. He knows, perhaps he realizes that the more this conflict continues in the Middle East, it's not going to be good for the United States. And of course, both Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio also emphasized that the U.S. has to reorient its foreign policy towards China. How can they do that if the United States is constantly bogged down in conflicts in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and what have you? So to be honest, I think most people would say the credit goes to the Trump administration even before Trump taking over, because if there's one thing Trump is good at, is that he knows how to remind everyone, especially allies, dependent allies, who is the superpower in the room. And the critique of the Biden administration was that they were essentially diffident, that they were not very capable in telling allies and partners or reminding them who's the superpower, who's providing the weapon systems, right? And who's essentially the strategic patron there. So even people are very critical of Trump are giving credit to him when it comes to this ceasefire deal, because it's honestly not too different from the one proposed 6, 7, 8 months ago. And yet now suddenly it's working because, well, of course, conditions have also changed, Israel's, military adventures over the past few months, but it's also because Trump is coming in.
Wow, I had to pause there for a second. Did I hear that right, Richard? You're giving Trump credit?
I know.
I need
Absolutely,
to process that for a
fair
second.
man. Yeah, that's why I have many bashers, right?
You
'Cause I'm
are a
never
very
predictable.
egalitarian man, yes. But
Yeah.
Pete Hegseth.
This is my version of Trump. I'll come from unpredictable angles.
See, is that right? Is that right? But Pete Hegseth is still a bit of a wild card at this point. The fact that he does not know a single country in ASEAN. I mean, you talk about wanting to reorient U.S. foreign policy towards China, but how does that work if your Secretary of Defense doesn't even know, zilch about the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the fact that, the Philippines is part of it and is a defense treaty ally to the United States?
Well, I'm not going to go into history of Fox News getting maps wrong in the Middle East, right? So for a Fox News anchor, although Princeton graduate guy, to not know ASEAN, it's not the shocking thing. I think it's really also fault of ASEAN. I think in many ways what happened there is a symptom of the state of mind in Washington, D.C., which is ASEAN is so ineffectual in the mind of a lot of Americans. ASEAN is so diffident that a lot of people, including Fox News anchors turned defense secretary soon, don't even bother to know what is ASEAN, right? But obviously, if you say Philippines, of course Pete Hegseth knows what's Philippines. Obviously, Pete Hegseth would know about our treaty alliance and would know about the South China Sea dispute. So I think that was less a question of ignorance about the Philippines or Southeast Asia than United States not caring at all about Southeast Asia. So siguro kasalanan din ng ASEAN. It's so I don't know, parang love na hindi na siniseryoso siguro.
So there's
ng
not
kahit
enough,
sino dyan.
we're not marketing
Yeah,
ourselves well
I'll
enough,
be
is
honest.
what you're
Like behind the
saying.
scenes in the West, most people don't take ASEAN seriously anymore. They used to. They really used to. Trump went to our ASEAN summit in 2017, but increasingly they're not paying attention. Kasi napagod na rin sila.
Well,
Purong
there's hardly a
consensus-based
consensus
thing
even
happens.
hardly a consensus even to this day on important issues like the South China Sea, right? So
Yeah. So I would have been shocked if he didn't know about the Philippines or mutual defense treaty. I'm sure he knows about that, and I'm sure that his number two guys, the undersecretaries, more than enough know about this part of the world. The reason I say that is because I saw a lot of pro Duterte people online twisting that and saying, "See, Trump is gonna abandon Marcos because Hegseth doesn't even know where is the Philippines." I said, "No. It's definitely not along those lines." Yeah.
So we shouldn't read too much into it. If my co-anchors are done with the South China Sea issue, I wonder if we could shift gears for a second and talk about local politics. I mean, you know that I went away for many weeks, for 7 weeks to do a fellowship and then also for the year-end holidays. But I come back here and the impeachment question is still hanging in the air. What is your take on where this is going?
Nagtanggal siya ng vest. Parang
It's
mahaba-haba
getting
ito.
hot.
Medyo umiinit
Mainit
ang
na.
discussion. I'll be quick because I can see your next guest coming in, a good friend of
Dadagdagan
ours.
ko na rin
Yeah,
kasi you posted,
Yes.
You posted on your Facebook commenting on President Marcos's soundbite a while ago saying that it is not the right
yes.
time for impeachment, and sabi mo, ayan ka na naman. Oo.
No, I just said BBM strikes again. So
Sorry,
like-
again.
No, I mean, my point is, of course, BBM has every reason to distance himself from what's happening in Congress, especially if his cousin Martin Romualdez is looking over shoulders, literally, if you look at the video kanina of his interview. Of course, this is supposed to be in the spirit of checks and balances, separation of powers, independence of the Congress, and obviously, of course, with the INC massive rally. I just don't know how they arrive at 861, 1,287,000. Like, you don't know how they calculated the exact number, but it was big enough. I think it was big enough for BBM not to openly endorse an impeachment against Sara Duterte. But was the INC peace rally big enough for BBM behind the scenes not to support an impeachment, for some of the folks in the Congress not to support it? I don't think so. I think as we speak right now, from what I understand, I cannot say more, but from what I understand, ang conversation ngayon is tactics. Are we going to do the impeachment, essentially the trial now, and then have the vote after elections? Are we going to wait for the next Congress to get the ball rolling? One of the proposals is you kind of do a hybrid. So you do the trial right now in the Congress and then in the Senate. And then once a new Senate comes in that for some, preferably is not so much filled with pro-Duterte people, then you can isolate the pro-Duterte people like Robin Hood Padilla, among others, and then you can get sufficient numbers. So there's some debate. And then there's some people who are saying, this is not about numbers, this is about principles, you just have to do what you have to do. Siguro, ang worst case scenario for some of the progressive people is that, ang fear nila dito is, nagpagamit sila. Because if you look at all the impeachment so far, the 3 impeachment complaints, it's all from genuine opposition folks. Akbayan, Makabayan, whatever. And so far, we're still waiting for the 4th version, and we're still waiting for the traditional politicians and the leadership in the Senate and Congress to make the move. So some people are also fearing that maybe some progressive went too excited against the Dutertes, and that they're going to be left essentially holding the empty bag at the end of the day. So that's why some people are very disappointed with the statements from President Marcos Jr., in as much as they know Marcos Jr. at least performatively has to project some sort of independence and distance from it. So, maging mainit-init ito. But from what I understand, tuloy ang impeachment. It's just a question of mechanics and sequencing and the exact time they want to have the vote. Is it under the current Congress? Is it current Congress right after election before the next Congress comes in? Or immediately when the next Congress starts? Each of these scenario have their pros and cons, and each of these scenario are essentially indeterminate, meaning no one can say for sure if this will succeed.
Maybe the administration
What is for sure is that Sara's numbers are really, really down. If you look at the SWS survey, her numbers are really, really low. Massive drop in her numbers. Her net approval ratings are just over 20%. OCTA survey, which I looked at yesterday, actually is even worse. Sara's net approval rating is double-digit below that of Marcos. So she has far more disapproval than Marcos. At the same time, her approval is around 48% versus 65% for Marcos. So Marcos is not doing fantastic compared to Duterte or Aquino. But Sara Duterte, considering how high she started, she's finding herself in a very, very vulnerable position. So even if she may get saved, meaning no impeachment will happen, her political capital is diminishing significantly, and that will have ramifications for her plans if ever she wants to run in 2028 for the highest office.
Well, to put it into context, even President Marcos in the latest SWS surveys also suffered double-digit drops. So it feels a bit like, people have had enough
Both
of
of
this
them.
political
Yes,
squabbling.
There is a mutual destruction, but once one side controls the livers of the state and massive budget, the other side is outside the circles of power. So it's a mutual destruction, but with asymmetrical effect. That's something we have to keep in mind. Yeah.
Very good point. We're going to have to leave that there for now. Always a pleasure talking to you. That's our resident geopolitical analyst, Richard Darren. Thanks for your time tonight.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but up next, we speak to DFA Undersecretary Ed De Vega for the latest on the wildfires in Los Angeles and how displaced Filipinos are holding up there. Stay with us. Keep it here on One News.
Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. Fire broke out at the power plant at Moss Landing along California's central coast, triggering evacuation orders, road closures, and more health warnings. The massive fire took place far from Los Angeles. It was at least 530 kilometers away, but still caused some anxiety for a state that's still reeling from massive wildfires. Over in Los Angeles, some 191 Filipinos have been displaced, with the number expected to increase. Consul General Adelio Angelito Cruz says they are closely monitoring the situation of the 40,000 Filipinos in LA County. In a display of bayanihan, the consul has also shared that the Filipino-American community have extended help not just to fellow Filipinos but to all others affected by the fires. Reports from CAL FIRE reveal that the fires have claimed the lives of 27 people and destroyed over 12,000 structures across LA County. The Department of Foreign Affairs have authorized the consulate to provide emergency assistance to each Filipino affected or impacted by the disaster. Let's discuss this with Yusek Ed De Vega of the Department of Foreign Affairs. He joins us on the Big Story tonight. Magandang gabi, Yusek.
Good evening.
Okay, the latest number that we have is 191 Filipinos affected, but that was as of January 14. I believe I saw in the news it's actually 400,000 Filipinos in LA County. What is the latest figure now?
Well, it's still 191 who actually requested assistance. For sure, there are a lot more who have been displaced. But there is a tendency, according to Congen Adel Cruz, for Filipinos in Los Angeles not to directly request our consulate for assistance because they have other sources, no, for the necessary assistance. Nevertheless, it is there if they request it. We will be open, the consulate will be open tomorrow, January 18 and January 25, 2 Saturdays in a row for emergency consular assistance. For those who are requesting, 191 of them, they'll be provided some financial assistance each. The good thing, though, is the fact that there are no Filipino casualties. Well, hopefully, when they identify the over 20, 24 to 27 dead bodies, that there's no Filipino comes out. Of course, it's all a tragedy, whatever the nationality is. But the consulate hopes and prays that within a week that the fires should have died down.
Okay, when we say 191 affected, have all of these Filipinos lost their homes completely? And
Yes.
what is the profile of the Filipinos who are living there? And what kind of assistance will the consulate give?
Majority of the Filipinos, well, not the majority, the Filipinos live there of all walks of life. Unlike a place like New York, for example, where the majority of the Filipinos are highly skilled professionals like doctors and nurses. In LA, they're all types. However, let us remember, the fires hit the Pacific Palisades. These are for the very wealthy elite of local society. So that may explain why you didn't hear many Filipinos losing their homes. The ones who are requesting assistance are among the lower paid, are among the non-highly paid workers in LA. They're not doctors or professionals, anything like that, no? So the assistance, aside from financial assistance, is the consulate contacts the Filipino NGOs and the government to make sure that there is something for them to look forward to, including making sure that they get the insurance, or in case there is none, that the local authorities in Los Angeles, as they're required to, will provide them the necessary benefits until such time that their home shall have been rebuilt.
So again, just to reiterate, the 191 figure is just the figure, the total for those who asked for help. But
Yes.
and you do expect that there are a lot more overseas
there will be bound
Filipinos
to be a
who
lot
were
more.
impacted, because there are a lot of news articles that have run away with that figure 191 and said that that's just the number of Filipinos that were impacted. We are expecting a lot more. It's just that 191 have approached the consulate. You also said the consulate will be open 2 Saturdays in a row to help those affected. What sort of assistance will the consulate be
these
providing?
are consular, meaning they're open like for like an ordinary working day. So a lot of the Filipinos there uh, may have lost their documents due to the fire. So we'll have to help them renew their passports or apply again for documents such as the NBI clearance or whatever they need. So the consulate will be open.
Okay.
Are a lot of these Filipinos insured? I know there's a lot of talk now about California being in an insurance crisis. A lot of the insurance companies have actually made the Acts of God packages very expensive, or if not, they have left California. Are those Filipinos insured? How much do you think they can recover? And in terms of the financial assistance given by the government, how much can we extend to them at this point?
Well, it's not a big amount. It's just the financial assistance. It's not a big amount. Just tiding them over about a few $100s each. But the government is providing. The Los Angeles government is providing. Various NGOs providing. You ask about insurance. That's something we still have to clarify. So far, the Filipinos have not actually said that they're having problems to claim for their insurance, for those who do have insurance. So at least for the Filipinos, it's not a problem. And I think not for the others as well, because they're not coming to the consulate.
How much did you say again? $200?
Yeah, it's a small amount just to tidy them over, because some of them actually have no money at all, because at least aside from their credit cards, they have no cash on hand. So this is just for immediate cash assistance. But they will be provided other goods by NGOs and the government of Los Angeles. And that $200 could again be repeated depending on what they absolutely need, because it's just to tidy them over. Some of them have their credit cards, so they have sources to pay what they would like to purchase. But it's just because, so for they would have cash
On hand.
cash in
Yes,
case they need cash in their wallets.
Well, Yusek, 191 of these Filipinos are also in evacuation centers. How long do you see them staying there? You did mention that they're usually not part of the elite class. So are any of them also asking to be repatriated to the Philippines?
No. Let me be frank about it. We all have relatives in the Philippines. Filipino relatives in the U.S. They won't ask to be repatriated to the Philippines. Nobody is asking. If I may segue a bit, there's always concern about
Deportation.
illegal aliens, including Filipinos, and what the Trump administration is going to do to them. The Trump administration has never targeted the Filipinos. If you look at, well, the incoming Trump administration during their campaign rallies, they clearly were targeting certain types of illegal aliens, not Filipinos. So we don't think they have too much to worry about. Although, of course, our ambassador gave them friendly advice: if you can go home now, in case you're really worried about deportation, and go home, rather than being deported and forever lose the right to return. Secondly, the destruction in LA proves the need of California in the United States to always have blue-collar workers, meaning alien, foreign workers, including some who may not have papers. So we're kind of confident that we won't see this wave of deportations of Filipinos as has been feared.
They may not be targeting Filipinos per se, but incoming President Donald Trump did promise to, on day one, to issue an executive order to force mass deportations. And a few months ago, we were talking to Philippine ambassador to the U.S., Babe Romualdez, and he said they had been reaching out to the community and repeatedly delivering the message that if you are not papered, if you're illegal, then, best to get out of the country now. And I'm wondering whether at your end you've had anyone, reach out to the DFA here to ask for assistance to come back.
No, because first of all, they have enough money to go back. You see, they're not indigent. Second, in fact, it's if at all there's some defiance and misunderstanding of what our ambassador said. He just said it's better for you to go home if that's what you fear for. And obviously, it means also if you want to stay, don't be high profile. I mean, just be law abiding. Remember, the Trump administration said they will be targeting overstaying aliens who are criminals, who commit crimes against Americans, who harm Americans. Number two, security threats. And number three, most important, those brought in by the Biden administration, millions of them, who are not productive to the U.S. economy. The Filipinos in the U.S. do not fall under any of those categories. Even the most conservative or controversial supporters of President Trump, if you hear them, if ever they talk about Filipinos, it's with a positive light. I will also say, if you remember, during his first term, President Trump claimed he would build a wall to separate Mexico and the United States. And what do you know? I was the Philippine ambassador to Mexico at that time. The Mexicans said they will not build or pay America to build that wall. Trump, to the best of our knowledge, did not build not even 10 meters of that wall. But he got what he wanted. The Mexicans tightened controls in their borders with the U.S. and also in the southern borders with Guatemala for those foreign nationals wanting to enter Mexico as a transit point to the United States. So Trump got what he wanted. So it is possible, and I'm only speculating, but based on experience, it is possible that what President-elect Trump wants to do is to set the conditions for illegal aliens to themselves go home, self-deport, or to make it clear to aliens, to foreigners, people like us, or the U.S. authorities will be stricter and don't come into the United States if your goal is to stay illegally. We're going to deport you. So just the immense effort and cost to deport 300,000 Filipinos will take many, many years beyond the term of President Trump, because when you are caught for deportation, you have the legal right to contest it. And that might take a year before it's concluded. So if you look at the 350,000 or so overstaying Filipinos in the United States, it's very doubtful that all of them will be deported before the end of the Trump presidency 4 years from now. So that's something we should assure our kababayans about. Nevertheless, as our ambassador said, if you have the option to go home now and you fear they're going against you, for example, you may be a Filipino in California who was a known anti-Republican, anti-Trump, a liberal protester, although without papers, and if you fear for what they might do to you, you have the option to go home. Now, what assistance will be providing? Well, we heard the DMW say returning Filipinos will be given financial assistance, integration. In our case, if they really have no finances to go home, well, we know they do, but if they don't, then we can pay the ticket. Except in the case of deportation, meaning where Filipinos are caught, it's the United States which has to pay for the ticket for them to go home. Nevertheless, we'll do what we can either way to assist them.
Yusek De Vega, going back to the Filipinos who are victims to the LA wildfires,
Yes.
it is not only their homes that they lost, but also their jobs. Is the consulate also helping them get their bearings back? I mean, do you have any idea as to what they're thinking of now, of doing in the future, having lost everything to the fire?
What's going to happen is our consulate will get them in touch with the right offices in order for them to get new jobs, or the necessary social welfare assistance, which the California system is very good at, until they do get new jobs. Because remember, our consulate is not the sovereign authority in California. And to protect all residents, including foreigners in California, it's still the obligation of the local authority. So it's not the consulate which is going to ensure that they're going to have jobs, but we can guide them to get that.
Yeah.
So I'll wait for the report of the Consul General. He has not mentioned that they has helped to regain the jobs, because let's face it, Filipinos are very, very resilient.
Yeah.
They have a great support community. They are great contributors to the U.S. economy. And that's why I mentioned earlier, we're confident that they will be protected, even with this new Trump presidency.
And then just very quickly, Yusek De Vega, last question we have about 30 seconds. More broadly, immigration-wise, okay, you're not too worried about mass deportation, especially not one that targets Filipinos, but do you expect that immigration in general will tighten under the Trump 2.0 administration?
Because he will lose base. There will be deportations. Remember,
what's the implications for Filipinos? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm at the hotel, so I'm looking around. The Obama administration deported more aliens annually than the first Trump administration. I believe that this time, President-elect Trump will, to show that at least he's not lying, will be deporting more. And that means there will be more Filipinos deported than in previous years. There are a few hundred who are deported every year. But again, to deport 370,000 Filipinos, that's extremely doubtful. By the way, can I take the time before I finish to respond to Mr. Hidarian? He mentioned that ASEAN is pretty much useless for the West. I must disagree. Under the principle of ASEAN centrality, ASEAN is the main organization which connects the Asian countries, not just ASEAN, but countries like China, Japan, Korea, and others in the region, in dialogue, in annual dialogue with Western partners. So it is still valid. And what do you know it? I have to say this because we will be the ASEAN chair next year. We will host the summit. We will host the ASEAN Regional Forum. And watch out. I think when we host it, there will be a lot of these world leaders coming here. I expect President Trump or certainly Marco Rubio to be here. So, Mr. Hidayat, you're my friend. But don't give up on ASEAN, please, especially since you're being chairman. I don't want you to be quoted by critics of ASEAN.
ASEAN has not lost its relevance, is your message.
Happy weekend, Happy New Year.
We'll send that message to Richard.
Thanks so much for talking to us tonight. We appreciate your time, DFA Undersecretary Eduardo De Vega.
All right, we're taking another quick timeout, but right after that, why is Senator Risa Ontiveros' bill on preventing teenage pregnancy so controversial these days? Find out after the break. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Story here on One News.
Senate remains bitterly divided over the bill filed by Senator Risa Ontiveros, which aims to minimize teen pregnancies in the country. And to some, the bill is too radical and inappropriate to Philippine culture. Ria Fernandez has that story.
Nakakabudol yung title ng bill, Preventing Teenage Pregnancy.
That's how Senator Joel Villanueva described a recent bill filed in the upper chamber that is drawing much flack from conservative sectors. Authored by Senator Risa Ontiveros, the measure aims to stomp out teenage pregnancies in the country through comprehensive sexuality education or CSE. This early, Villanueva already has reservations.
Pag binasa mo yung buong bill, di ba? And sabi nga nila, the devil is in the detail. Ito ay radical, ito ay inappropriate at damaging to children, yung mga provision.
Villanueva in particular pointed out Section 6 of the bill, which is about developing appropriate sexuality education among those below the adult age group, including children in preschool and grades 1 and 2.
International standards. Ano ba yung sinasabi ng international standards? Puntahan natin yung WHO. WHO, 0 to 4-year-olds are to be taught early childhood masturbation. 4 to 6 years old are to be taught skills to talk about sexual matters.
But here's one important note on Ontiveros' bill. It does not really directly mention that this form of autoeroticism should be taught to minors.
Walang-wala yung mga ataking iyon tungkol kuno sa masturbation, anal and oral sex, sexual rights, sa mga bata. Those are outright fabrications. Pagsisinungaling po yun tungkol sa bill.
Senator Risa likewise clarifies that her bill on preventing pregnancies among adolescents was drafted with Filipinos' experiences in mind.
Walang intensyon o obligasyon sa batas na gayahin ng walang pag-iisip ang anumang international standard. Kung may nakasaad dyan na hindi akma sa konteksto at kultura ng Pilipinas, syempre hindi yan gagamitin. Common sense po iyan. DepEd pa rin, kasamang ibang relevant agencies at dapat may consultation with various stakeholders ang mag-i-implement ng CSE.
Senator Villanueva, though, has other worries. He is concerned about parents losing the responsibility to teach sexuality education to their children. Under the bill, sexual and reproductive health information and services will be readily available to young adults 16 years old and above. Only those under 15 need permission to acquire these, either from their parents or, in the absence of biological or immediate guardians, from licensed social workers, doctors, or medical professionals. At the moment, there is debate on whether or not to prioritize the Senate bill on educating teenagers about their sexuality. Even Senate President Chis Escudero is against portions of the measure that is already up for second reading. But these numbers will be important in the discourse. Data from the Philippine Statistics Authority showed that in 2022, there were more than 150,000 adolescents who gave birth. This figure slightly went down in 2023, but what's notable is the higher number of young women who got pregnant at the age of 15 below. For News 5, I'm Ria Fernandez. We are One News.
All right, and that's a big story for us this Friday.
We are One News on Science all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.
Oh, it's
And a good weekend.
First weekend back.